Hello, and welcome to the Movies That Stand the Test of Time, the show where we celebrate and critique cult classics, hidden gems, and guilty movie pleasures. I am your host, Craig Aiken.
And I'm Eric Larson, co-host and producer of the show.
This is episode 0, the pilot episode, where we're going to talk about the premise of the show. And essentially the premise of our show is we're going to be taking a look at older movies, 15 years or older, and we're going to take a look at them critically. Kind of really judge and analyze storytelling. Believability. And what I mean by believability, it's going to be script writing, acting, special effects. We're going to look at some of the film techniques, camera work, editing, pacing. You know, was there any kind of filter on the film? Was it in black and white? And also, you know, black and white is a movie technique. You know, not just older movies, but sometimes if we want movies that are dramatic, it could be in black and white. So those are going to be some of the things that we're going to be taking a look at. And also for the format of the show, we're going to have a rotating third chair for a guest. So when we're taking a look at our movies, we're going to be taking a look at who directed it, who starred, what year it was released, what studio released the movie, if there is interesting stories about the pre-production of the movies, interesting stories about the release and critical reception. I think we're also going to dive into the plot of the movie. And we're going to talk about our favorite parts. We're going to talk about, as I said, really the different elements of the movies, and that's going to drive us to the conclusion on whether or not the movie stands the test of time. So when we give our verdict on whether or not the movie stands the test of time, we are going to try to not look at it with nostalgia. We're going to try to clear the nostalgia filter, the rose-colored glasses, and really kind of take a look at it with a more critical eye. And I know you and I have had the conversation about nostalgia versus not nostalgia, right? You know, I think nostalgia is really the enemy of critical thinking. I mean, obviously,
everyone loves nostalgia.
Exactly. And at the same time, while we do love nostalgia, we like nostalgia because it takes us back to an older time, a time where we were younger. Maybe it was a halcyon day where, you know, things were better, or we perceive they were better, the good old days. But we don't want to fall back on that. We want to kind of take a look at it and also kind of don't overly, also, you mentioned presentism, right?
Right.
And did you want to talk about what presentism is?
Sure, yeah. Looking through time with present day values. So basically judging a movie like Scarface or a movie that maybe today would be controversial, but at the time that the movie was made, it was, you know, less controversial and less triggering. So we're going to try and look at movies critically and judge them based on story and all the elements that make them good.
Yeah, and you know, and I think also what would be interesting leading into that also is taking a look at the legacy. You know, a lot of these movies that we take a look at very well could have sequels. Maybe they've had reboots. Maybe we can even talk about, hey, should it still be rebooted? You know, one thing that I really dislike about most reboots is you're taking a movie that was good and you're rebooting it. It's it's unlikely to be as good as the original. I think it's sometimes better to take a movie that has a great concept or was adapted from something and either, you know, and make it better, you know, readapt it or just attempt to make it better. And it's easier to do that with like a mediocre movie with an excellent premise. And I think also part of it too, it's not like when we take a look at these movies, not all of it is necessarily going to stand the test of time. We might pick and choose, hey, these are the things that do stand the test of time. These are the things that are dated. But then we're going to kind of take a look at the whole movie kind of as a, you know, take a look at all the pieces and see if it's greater than the sum of all its parts. So now, at the same time, we know that there are movies that it's self-evident that they stand the test of time. And I don't think that we're gonna really talk about those movies or have a full episode about those movies.
Right. I think we'll definitely touch on them because they have helped shape our culture. They are pretty much the gold standard for movies in general.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you want to just go through some of those.
Yeah, absolutely. For example, Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think that's an example of a movie that stands the test of time. I think it was also, made or released in 1981. It's a film that is about 1936, so already it's kind of number one, playing into some nostalgia, but it's also kind of a pulp adventure. But a lot of those film techniques are techniques that we're still using today or aspire to use today. Of course, the acting is fun. And maybe there's some special effects that don't stand the test of time.
Yeah, right.
But I think overall, I said a lot of people will take a look at, okay, this is one of the templates of doing a treasure hunting adventure. In fact, I just watched The Lost City a couple weeks ago, and that's a fun treasure hunting movie, but I don't think it's going to have the same place as Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I could see some of the influence on it. Another movie that I think also stands the test of time is Ghostbusters. I think it's a fascinating movie in regards to its techniques, its humor. I think a lot of times people want to lump that into it as a comedy, but I don't really see it as a comedy. I see it more of these kind of unique comedic type characters that are playing it straight. And they're put in these kind of funny or strange situations, and the comedy comes from their reactions to it. So I think that's, and maybe what we will do is Ghostbusters 2. I think there's some more conversation whether or not that stands the test of time or not.
Right.
Obviously not as good of a movie. And then, so my favorite movie of all time is Jaws. Again, I think that movie is a movie that absolutely stands the test of time. It's more than just a horror movie. It's more of I kind of think of it as it's a man against the system. It's a man against his fears. So it starts off with kind of a story about kind of overcoming obstacles, and then it turns into an adventure flick. But again, some of the techniques, script writing, performance, music, I think all those really do stand the test of time, and it could be kind of fun to kind of reference that movie here on some of these other ones that may or may not stand the test of time. Any movies you could think of that you think are kind of like those golden calves, or movies that stand the test of time, that are self-evident?
Star Wars definitely stands, in my mind, stands the test of time, but I do know of people who have seen it for the first time and they think it's slow, or they think it's campy or whatever, and seeing it with fresh eyes, they don't think it stood the test of time. But I don't know, if we didn't have Star Wars, I think our world would be much different.
Yeah, a lot of film techniques, and I think what's interesting about that too, you have really it's a hero's journey, right? A lot of people say that it actually was somewhat adapted from Hidden Fortress. I'm not sure if you've ever seen Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress. I watched it here within the last year, and actually, it is interesting. There is a story of a princess that's kind of fleeing from a big bad guy here, a black-clad samurai. I don't think it's not nearly as much of a one-for-one comparison. I think there's some themes to it. I think it's a lot more fun than Hidden Fortress. But at the same time, I could definitely see some of those techniques of a hero's journey. So I think that's definitely a movie that we'll probably stay away from for some reason. I think it's been well explored.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
But I think we'll try to kind of come up with some movies that are going to be maybe less thoroughly explored, or maybe controversial in whether or not it stands the test of time. The movie that kind of triggered this conversation and this podcast / show is The 13th Warrior. It's a movie that hasn't been widely released on digital formats, or it's kind of hard to find a little bit, right? I have like the DVD of it. I don't even think they've issued a Blu-ray of this movie. It came out in 1999, and it was one of those kind of action adventures where they have to find and kill mythological presence. I personally enjoy it. I think it's a fun movie. I think that'd be fun and really instructive to see, hey, this movie stands the test of time, or really what parts of it do, what parts of it don't. Another movie that I would like to do would be Casino Royale. We've had Daniel Craig's run, his complete run of James Bond. His first movie was Casino Royale. I mean, that movie came out in 2006. So it's definitely fits the criteria of it being a movie that's 15 years or older. But it'll be interesting just to kind of see that. And we can even talk about some other James Bond movies too, because I like all the James Bond movies, even the campy ones like Moonraker. I think we'll do some guilty movie pleasures as well. I mean, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Kevin Costner.
Kevin Costner's, yes, Robin Hood. Yes, he did not have a British accent except for the first 2 or 3 lines that he spoke. Still love that movie.
And Morgan, who could not love Morgan Freeman?
He's great in everything he does.
Yeah.
It's of a time and place for sure. I mean, Christian Slater, I love him as an actor, but
is he in that?
He is in there.
I didn't know.
He plays Will Scarlet, and he just looks like he was just transported from 1991 into the Middle Ages. So, but nonetheless, I think. And of course, Alan Rickman as the sheriff of Nottingham, I think it would be kind of a fun one to kind of just take a look at the movie as a whole, take a look at the acting and some of the filming techniques on that. I think another movie too that we're kind of be taking a look at different genres, and I would love to take a look at Akira. And
I'm not familiar with this one.
Yes, it's a 1988 anime. It is based off of 1982 manga. But it's a dystopian future tale. Some people say it's a cyberpunk movie or a cyberpunk genre. Not really too much in regards to cybernetics, but there is some kind of esper powers, like psychic powers. And so I'd also like to do Tombstone. We'll do a Western here, and that's, I haven't seen that in a few years. I love Kurt Russell. He's one of my favorite actors. I think he brings a lot of nuance to the character, a lot of humanity to Wyatt Earp. And I know that around that same time...
And Val Kilmer.
As Doc Holliday.
Yeah.
It's one of those stories, too. And I think this would also be something fun in exploring that, and even maybe comparing that compared to Wyatt Earp. Speaking of Kevin Costner, the Wyatt Earp is a far more serious take on the movie, whereas Tombstone's a little bit more campy, a little bit more fun. But I love that movie. It'd be fun to do a Western.
For sure.
So anyways, those are a couple of movies that I would like to take a look at, review. What about you?
Yeah, so what my first rated R movie that I saw as a kid and is definitely a classic is Predator. Schwarzenegger just delivered on that, and actually the same director who directed that did 13th Warrior.
Yes.
Yeah. So
John McTiernan.
Looking forward to exploring that, and even a couple other movies he did. The next movie, and I think that we both agreed that this is a movie from our childhood, and another Kurt Russell movie, Big Trouble in Little China, I think it's a cult classic. John Carpenter directed, and it's just...
I love that movie.
The nostalgia of it for me.
That'll be a tough one to take off our rose-colored glasses. That is a movie that I've seen it probably a dozen times in just like the last 10 years.
I haven't seen that movie in 20 years.
I watch it almost once a year. I almost just kind of have to watch that every year. But if I'm having a bad day, that's actually one of the movies that I go back to and I will watch. I love it. definitely would be fun to explore. And I said, since my perspective is a little bit fresher than yours, I definitely could tell that there's parts of it that stand the test of time. Some elements don't, but that would be a fun, interesting look at. So that would be a fun one for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and we'll have to get into this more, but the star performance and Kurt Russell, how much he can carry a movie and make it good versus, a movie that has a mediocre actor and a mediocre story. Anyway.
Yeah, no, and you know what? I think we'll when we get to that one, I think we'll have to have a conversation about whether or not Kurt Russell's character, if he is the hero or if he's the sidekick.
Okay.
Because I think there's some debate whether or not.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Okay, and then the next one I have to do is a movie that was kind of transformative for me. It just did so much, and it's so artistic, and that's Pee-wee's Big Adventure. I just love that movie. I don't know, it stands on its own as kind of this unique little gem that tells a story in a very childlike way. Danny Elfman did the soundtrack, and I just loved it. I grew up on Oingo Boingo.
I believe it's Tim Burton too. He directed the movie. It's I think that's also really a big stepping stone in his career. We know Tim Burton now. He directed, of course, just 4 years later would be the seminal classic, the 1989 Batman. I think that would be a fun one to possibly explore too here.
Yeah.
But absolutely, that's a fun movie too, and also surprisingly scary. There's some, is it Large Marge?
Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah, she terrified me as a kid.
Right. And after that, another one that I'd love to do is the classic Maverick, which is it was a movie that was a spin-off from a James Garner TV show.
Yeah,
and,
the Western Maverick, yes.
Yeah, and James Garner is the dad, spoiler alert, in Maverick. He's the father of Maverick, and I think that movie's a classic, and I could watch that anytime.
Yeah, spoiler on that movie, 1994, so we're looking at, this is going almost on 30 years old.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I like that movie too. I remember seeing that movie in the theater with one of my friends, and I didn't have much expectations for it. I was a Mel Gibson fan because of the Lethal Weapon series.
Yeah, Mel Gibson is one of these actors where he kind of plays a straight role, but he's very comedic, and that's why Maverick is so good, and he kind of really makes that role work.
Yeah. And that's a Richard Donner film. He directed the Lethal Weapon series.
Oh, really? Well.
Yeah. So definitely, I didn't have much expectations for it. It exceeded all my expectations. It's so much fun. Mm-hmm. And I think that would be a fun one to go ahead and take a look at.
Sure.
Any other movies?
Well, this one is just kind of a guilty pleasure, and it's one of those shoot 'em up revenge type movies is Boondock Saints, and I think it's probably still a cult classic. And the last one I'm going to do, and I'm going to flip flop, is Sabrina, and we touched on it, but Sabrina it's a remake from a Humphrey Bogart movie, and Harrison Ford and Greg Kinnear and Julia Ormond are the cast, and I don't know that. John Williams does a soundtrack on it. I love the music, and it's just a fun story.
That's Harrison Ford, and was it
Greg Kinnear is the brother.
Yeah. I've only seen that movie once. So
wow, yeah.
I'd be curious to see if it stands the test of time or not.
Oh yeah, for sure, it does.
So yeah, those are a couple of our picks here. We'll get to those movies. So kind of in preparation for our pilot episode, I refer back to some different years. I picked a random year, 1995, and I thought, hey, what movies came out that year? Do these movies stand the test of time or not? and maybe see if you can find a trend or not. And these are some of the movies that came out in 1995. Batman Forever, Toy Story, Goldeneye, Apollo 13, Waterworld, Braveheart, Clueless, The Net, Bad Boys, Jumanji. I mean, that's a very interesting take on movies. And I could just tell, hey, there's some movies there that didn't necessarily stand the test of time. They may have been dated when they came out, like Batman Forever. They said it would be a fun one to take a look at.
Right.
Val Kilmer's performance as Bruce Wayne in Batman, maybe not the best interpretation of Batman, but definitely interesting. The filming technique is a little bit, different than Tim Burton's. It was a Joel Schumacher directed flick, but at the same time, you also have movies like Apollo 13, which I think that's a Ron Howard directed film. I think it's a very interesting, docudrama that I think absolutely would stand the test of time. I remember too that it didn't get nominated for best special effects because they thought that it was using archival footage, and it's like, no, those were special effects.
Wow.
And I think that absolutely would. But Waterworld is one of those movies that was dubbed a flop when it came out here. A lot of story about its production going over budget. It's Kevin Costner, and I'm trying to remember who the director is. His name. It's another Kevin. I think he directed The Field of Dreams. There was a lot of debate on how that show or that movie should progress and how.
Well, I remember all the talk about the budget of the movie and how expensive it was, and when we talk about Apollo 13 and Waterworld, these are epic movies that just aren't made anymore.
Yeah.
One Ron Howard movie that I also think we should look at is Far and Away with Tom Cruise, which is a fun movie, and it's an epic. Like it's a 3-hour long movie, and tells a really neat story of
immigration and kind of. It's an American story, basically, of, basically they
the importance of the land and earning and working hard, and it has a really good fight sequence in it.
So that would be a fun one. So I'm not sure what year that one came out in, so that would be something that we'd have to take a look at. But if you're looking at 1995, it said Waterworld. I think they said it was deemed a flop when it came out. I bet you it would be an interesting one to take a look at, just because I bet you it might even be better received today. I think there might be more, with global warming and all that kind of part of the discourse. It would be kind of interesting just to kind of review that movie and take a look and see, hey, is this kind of, was it predictive or is it just a little more farcical? It'd be kind of a fun one. But can you believe, The Net with Sandra Bullock, are just concepts of the internet are just completely different. Obviously, the internet today is ubiquitous with modern life.
Did The Net come out before Speed? Was that her first movie?
No, Speed came out in 1994.
Okay.
So it was kind of like that time where all of a sudden she's broke out. In 1994, I would say with Speed, that was her breakout flick. So she was kind of getting some of these other kind of smaller films and some larger films as well. But she was really becoming a star there in that late 90s. Like Demolition Man came right after that too. So I think that's a guilty pleasure. So they said that was 1 year, 1995. They said we could take a look at just how some movies do, some don't. I think that's going to be like that in most years. So one more fun exercise too when we're talking about some older movies. Some people think 1982 is the best year for movie making, at least in the last 50 years, right? We're almost up to 50 years here, right? It's that year, E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark, Rocky III, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, First Blood, Conan the Barbarian, Tron, Blade Runner, Time Bandits, The Thing, another John Carpenter film. So that would be, maybe we could even do, hey, here's some of the years of some movies. or we could just we could take those piecemeal and kind of figure out which ones do or
Well,
don't.
the thing about all of those are, minus Rocky 3, is they were all original stories. And yeah, looking at how Hollywood and how movie making at that time, they would take chances on new stories that haven't been released. That's pretty amazing.
Well, yeah. I mean, you do have Star Trek, which is, was intellectual property.
Right.
And technically Conan the Barbarian as well was an adaptation, but it was an experiment. But there was also a lot of experimentation. Not everything had to be IP.
Right.
Nowadays, when you make a movie, it better be an IP, because we're going to want to make a sequel out of it. We want to have maybe a streaming service, show based on it.
Well, even the pre-sale, like if people haven't heard of it, the people funding, paying for the movie, or the studios are going to be like, how are we going to sell this?
Yeah. How are we going to return on investment, right?
Yeah.
So, well, that's going to be basically, the kind of the format of the show. Is there anything else that you wanted to discuss?
No, I look forward to getting into these movies and exploring them.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you for your time. Buckle in, movie fans. Let's hop into that metaphoric DeLorean, run up to 88, and see if these movies stand the test of time. I'm Craig Aiken, and we are out.